let me start by saying my name is Don Cowell. I'm in New York City with Chinese American Planning Council Project Reach, and we've been doing LGBT work since 1985. And we're in all 5 boroughs. And I was asked by Melissa Sklars, one of our panelists, as well as MJ, to facilitate this panel because for some reason they said I was an expert. I'm not so sure that's true, but we did have an incredible intergenerational Ageism Across the Generations workshop out in Staten Island, where we brought together LGBT youth of color and LGBT seniors of both white and of color. And it was great. And I thought it would be interesting for me to learn more from all of you who are in the trenches doing this work. So could we go around and just have folks introduce themselves? And it's a very diverse panel of 4. And I thought maybe if each of you could say like a minute of just describing who you are and, you know, what identities or communities you represent, just so people could get a sense of the breadth of the diversity of our panel. And could we start with you, Melissa? Would that be okay?
My name is Melissa Sklars. I use she, her pronouns. I'm formerly of SAGE. I'm a longtime transgender political activist and advocate. I'm currently an elected district leader in Queens, where I live. I've been involved with trans people and trans spaces for probably over 40 years now, and I think I might be the oldest person on the panel.
At least by 1 year, we've established. Does that mean, Gyro, are you going to disclose your age?
I'm 75.
Oh, well, there you go. You're
no
you're at the top.
with that.
I'm 70. Melissa's gonna have to disclose on herself, but Sheer, why don't you go next, since you're about 80 now, right?
I mean, I feel about 80. I'm tired and feeling a little burnt out. Well, we have a special guest, y'all, and her name is Nutmeg. I have a puppy named Nutmeg, and she sometimes likes to be in her terrible twos, as she's doing now. But hello, everyone. Those of you who have been tuning in throughout the day may know who I am, but for those who are just tuning in to this session, I'm Sheer Avery. I use they, them pronouns. I'm the New York City community organizer at the New Pride Agenda. We are a legislative and educational advocacy organization mobilizing the LGBTQ plus community across the state of New York to advocate for the most marginalized members of our community. I have been engaged in social justice advocacy since the age of 13. I'm 23 today. And
happy birthday.
Today is not my birthday.
Oh,
the way you said that.
At present, I'm 23 with a mindset of a 45-year-old. But I've been engaged in social justice movements since I was underage, since I was 13. My advocacy really was born out of a need to speak up and advocate for myself as a foster youth, as a survivor of conversion therapy, as a homeless young person, and as someone who needed to access public services, receive housing support, and educational and employment support. And so I really saw the power of a young person who dared to speak up and speak truth to power within myself. And I saw the reaction of my elders and people in positions of power around me who were really taken aback by that not being the norm. And so my advocacy is really rooted and centered in the empowerment of young people and encouraging young people to speak up and get involved, because we've always led movements for social justice. We've always been at the vanguard. Marsha, Sylvia, Major, were all young people when they started our movement. And so when we look throughout history, young people have always been at the vanguard. And I'm really excited for today's conversation because I really believe in the power of intergenerational mentorship and connection as a necessity if we want to sustain the longevity of our movement. So I'm really grateful to be here. Thank you so much, Don.
Oh, thank you, Sheer. Thank you so much. Lajira, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Lajira Cooper, and my pronouns are she, her. I don't even know how to describe what I do. Well, actually, I'll put it this way. I didn't really become a real strong advocate looking at how policies and comments and laws affect people until I was taking a class in diversity within the last 5 or 6 years when I went back to school and got 3 degrees. And when I took that class, he whose name I still refuse to mention gave his inaugural address. And then during that class made me recognize the fact that, one, there was a lot of history I didn't know. So if there's a lot of history I don't know, there's a lot of history my co-agers don't know. There's a lot of history young people don't know. So as a writer, I tend to find pieces, email, Facebook, do all that stuff just so people know what's going on. And especially with all the garbage that's going on right now. And it's an interesting thing of talking to seniors and trying to get them to understand they need to listen sometimes to younger people. And it's very interesting, the comment you made, Sheer, about young people being advocates, because if you go back to the civil rights movement, it was young people who were out there in the streets. And one of the things Margaret Atwood said, there are 2 groups that are great advocates: young people because they have no children, and older people because they don't really care anymore. So they can be an advocate. And since I'm a rebel with a cause and many causes under that umbrella of social justice, stop separating them into, I think everything's connected. So that's my thing. I'm a writer, I'm a facilitator. I've been with Sage for I don't even know how long anymore. And it's just something one needs to do, because I keep saying, and I have to say this, if we don't watch out, if everybody's read The Handmaid's Tale, we're headed to Gilead.
Thank you. Thank you. MJ, would you want to, have we heard from Gracie, or would you want to share a little bit about Gracie in her absence?
Yeah, so Gracie, who might be joining a little bit later, Gracie's pronouns she, they. They're a high school student in upstate New York who's been working to organize and make sure that they can access classes and services at their school to support the LGBTQ plus community. And they've really expressed a lot of interest in building more of those intergenerational connections, because right now a lot of her work is very focused on making sure that GSAs are present in school and trying to make sure that people feel comfortable in the upstate setting, really being open about their identities and really connecting and trying to build those connections with elders. So we'll see if Gracie's able to join, but I think for the purpose of time, we can jump on to the rest of the agenda.
Okay, thank you, MJ. So we have some questions that we'd like to ask, and MJ and I didn't get any feedback, so we're assuming the questions are maybe okay, but if they're not, then you can answer whatever question you'd like. But I'd like to just have everybody go around and answer the question, what does intergenerational advocacy mean to you? And anybody can start, or I can. Yeah.
Great, I'll start. Thank you. Thanks, Don. It's always great to share space with you. So
thank you.
Something funny happens when you're an advocate or an activist. I can remember being new and finding mentors and learning how to do it. And then I could remember being the centerpiece, the point person on so many different issues and ideas. And then something wondrous happens where it happens seemingly overnight, where all of a sudden a new generation steps up and finds their voice and puts their passion and vision to work. And then for those of us that have been in the spotlight, we reach that crossroads. Am I going to leave? I've done my work, let them figure it out. Or is it important to stick around, be available if needed, if the experience that I've learned in 25 years of advocacy can help, or more importantly, the style to communicate so that people in power listen and understand exactly what the concerns are. And so obviously, you know, there were lots of people in the late 80s and early 90s doing advocacy, but I found that I'm willing to support our new leaders like Sheer, like Alyssa Crespo, like Amanda. It's really important. It is their time now, and my experience is available if needed and if asked for. And yet my style of communicating is always a good tool to help as people learn to navigate corridors of power.
Thank you, Melissa. Sheer, since you were mentioned, do you want to go next?
Happy to. I think that is a great place to start us off, Melissa. I really want to take a moment to acknowledge young leaders and elders who have really paved the way across generations for young people like me to even be sitting here today. Melissa is one of those people. Miss Major is one of those people. Kyan Dorshow is one of those people. Sir Lady Java is one of those people. And there are countless others who have been engaged in advocacy, who have fought hard for wins, who may never get a moment of recognition or acknowledgement because that isn't why we do this work. This work often is glorified, but it's important to acknowledge, and I'm sure Melissa, Dawn, and all of us can speak to the fact that this is really difficult work. And so for me, when I think about intergenerational connection, I think about mentorship. I think about how we can lean on each other, tap into each other's skills, and to continue growing. You know, I believe wholeheartedly that you learn something new every day. And, you know, even if you are an older person, you have a life in front of you that is still worth living out proud and boldly. And so I think, you know, our lives don't stop and end when we reach the age of 25 and 60. There are many people who we, as young people and as older leaders, can really tap into to really uplift and empower and develop leadership. Leadership is a skill. It is something that is developed, to Melissa's point, when you are engaging with people in power. As much as anyone who knows me knows that I don't believe in respectability. And I like to speak truth to power. You know, but the sad reality is that if I walked into a senator's office or an assembly member's office and cussed and screamed and kicked the walls, we wouldn't go and we really wouldn't get anywhere. But organizing an effective organizing strategy, rallying hundreds of people, organizing the legislator to stand behind you and to stand in solidarity, picking up the phone, making cold calls to people in community who have access to networks and resources. Those are all skills that I think and to Melissa's point, we can really use to elevate the leadership of other people. That's what I think about when I think about intergenerational connection. None of us left behind. How are we using our lived experiences and our knowledge and our expertise to really bring us all towards a place of liberation? Because we're not there yet. We are not there yet. We are not liberated. We are not free. We are not unchained from the shackles that even our ancestors experienced decades, centuries, millennia ago. And so we have a lot of work to do. The last thing that I'll say to this point is that I think it's really important for there not to just be one young person at the table. For so many years, I have been the only young person at countless tables. And sometimes I've been the only Black and Indigenous trans non-binary person at those tables. And so what I'm getting at here is that we have a very strong, diverse, powerful community. There's not one person who is a leader over the next person. We all have enormous potential. And I really think it's about bringing more of us, not to the table, but building our own damn table so that we can all have a voice, so that we can all be represented, so that we can all empower each other in this work, so that we can sustain our movement, so that we can sustain the longevity that so many of our elders and our ancestors and our transcestors have fought for.
Thank you, Sheer. That was great. The other thing that we don't have in terms of we have an absence of young people, we also have an absence of time. We've only gotten 45 to 50 minutes. So I'm going to ask Lajara. I've got a lozenge in my throat because I'm going to start coughing if I don't have it.
No,
I'm going to ask Lajara if you could speak a little bit to what intergenerational advocacy means by maybe helping us understand what you have learned from younger LGBTQ community members through your work, your advocacy work in New York and Washington, D.C., and through running intergenerational writing classes.
I think the major thing I've learned is to listen. And I think that's a really important skill to have. And active listening, not just sitting there pretending you're listening. It was just like something Shira said a minute ago about the table and chairs. And I remember Shirley Chisholm's comment about if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. And since I'm a rebel with a cause, I work very hard to get people to understand their history. Because as I mentioned before, I don't want to see us go to Gilead, nor do I want to see us go to It Can't Happen Here, because I see it coming. And I think too many, I don't know if it's, I don't know which group it is. I shouldn't say that because then it's saying that each group is monolithic, and we're not. We're all different. We all have things to bring to the table. So it's just listening and absorbing and questioning when somebody says something that sort of you sort of pull back from. It's the ability to go, okay, could you tell me more about that? Or what do you mean? Or why did you say that? As opposed to jumping on people with both feet and then they don't want to help or they don't want to associate with you. So I think those things and the writing from with my writing groups, although most of the people in my writing groups are of the elder age, I do have one young person there, and he just got his PhD doing something in gerontology and LGBTQ people. Don't remember what, but the thing is, that's his thing. He says he comes to listen, so he can because he wants to be a better person to help other people.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Lajara. Shira, could you talk a little bit about what you've learned in all your years of activism, particularly around trans rights, what you've learned from elders, if
Mm.
anything, except
I've
that there were
learned
too numerous.
I've learned a lot from elders. Elders have really taken me under their wing, particularly Cayenne Dorshow, Kiera St. James, Miss Major, and so many others, particularly in New York and in Los Angeles, Bambi Salcedo, for example. I have learned a lot of incredible life lessons. I have learned a lot of our history. I have learned a lot about the grit it takes to do this work. I've learned a lot about how to sustain myself, to care for myself as a young person, as an advocate. Because the truth of the matter is that there are so many more resources available to young people today for my generation and for the next generation. There is more knowledge and more tolerance today than there was even 10, 20, 30 years ago. And so I would be remiss to say that I haven't learned anything from the people who have paved the way for me to have a voice and to feel empowered to speak truth to power. It's because of them. I think in my personal experience as a young person, as a Black and Indigenous non-binary trans person, as someone who is often the only young person in a space, in a room, writing letters, calling legislators, what I have learned is that people are really quick to lift up young people and so quick to knock us down when we dare to be bold, when we dare to be audacious, when we are boosting from the seams with creativity and passion, when we want to be innovative and to think differently. Sometimes that scares folks. Sometimes it can feel like it's too much. And sometimes it can feel as if there is a disregard for the path that has been laid before. So I have learned how to thread the needle more intentionally, how to push the envelope more carefully, how to reach out and be an active participant in the lives of elder leaders who are still providing so much support and resources to young people like me. I've also learned that, you know, from a trans perspective, because you also asked me to speak to the specificalities around what I've learned in terms of advocating for trans equality, for trans equity, for trans wellness. What I have learned is nothing different than what was known to Marsha and to Sylvia. There is a very famous speech of Sylvia Rivera at the Gay Liberation March, I believe, under the Washington Square arc, talking to the community about the ways in which they co-opted a movement that was started by trans people of color, the ways in which the community so quickly brushed us aside and took our wins for theirs. And so I have learned that that is not all so different today. When marriage equality passed in 2015 and became the law of the land, it was almost as if just as quickly as the white cis gays stood up with pitchforks and picket signs, they were just as quick to wash their hands and go home to a white picket fence, a husband and a dog, and make pie. But what about those within the community who are still being left behind? There is such a notion that we have passed the tipping point, that, you know, equality means equity for everyone. I have learned the hard way as someone who has experienced homelessness, incarceration, and so many precarities. I have learned the hard way that equity is not a common lived reality for trans people like me, young, old, and in between. Equity is not within my lived reality. And I'm sure, Melissa, you can say the same. I'm sure any trans person we talk to will say that they've experienced discrimination in the workplace, that they have had difficulty accessing public services, that they've experienced housing discrimination, that they don't get paid the same amount as even their cisgender counterparts. And so the real lesson here is that we need to move beyond a culture of equality towards a culture of equity. And to end this part of my remarks, I'll say something that Kiara St. James said earlier on our first panel. Equity means that the people who need the most get the most. And that's not our white cis gaze. It never was. It's time that we center Black, Indigenous, and immigrant trans people of color.
Thank you, Shir. And thank you for qualifying the difference between equity and equality, because I think most people totally miss the point, and I want to appreciate your comments. Melissa, how are you doing? Melissa, could you share, because you've been involved with LGBT elders for so many years, could you share some of the top issues that you feel are facing LGBT elders at this time? And what do you think would be the calling for younger LGBT folks in terms of partnering with elders to address those issues?
Thanks, Don. Well, as Shir was pinpointing, you know, it's such a big community and there are so many different needs. And I was the government relations strategist, as the position was called, for SAGE for 3 legislative sessions. And so I worked in both City Hall and here in Albany. And so the job is to promote legislation that helps LGBT elders in New York and to find resources to shake the money tree to make sure that our SAGE services, our SAGE centers throughout the city and our associated partners throughout the state have the resources so that all of our agencies can be fulfilled and provided. We have elder housing in the city. There are SAGE centers. But here's an interesting fact, Don. You know, you and me and Lajira all know this, that there are, at last count, there are 250,000 LGBTQ New Yorkers over the age of 65. It is a huge cohort. You can count on one hand the number of people that are advocating for that group of people. We're lucky to have MJ here from SAGE and his team. But this is a difficult truth. You know, when we want to engage in the community, you know, the number one priority is going to be racial justice. Number 2 is going to be survival and safety for our youth. But somewhere on the spectrum has to, what are we going to do about that 250,000 LGBTQ New Yorkers that are over the age of 65? And there are very few resources, very few people. You know, I was proud and honored to be able to stand up. I would go to Albany and talk to lawmakers, and I was the voice for doing that work. Other people are sort of kind of close to it. I was the voice doing that work. You and I became friends because you're one of the few LGBT people actually having elders within your portfolio, and that's how we've become and stayed friends. I'm excited that with SAGE is making new partners, and in doing that, it's going to enlarge in our group of our advocates that are speaking on behalf of not only elders in New York, but LGBT elders. And I think their success. SAGE is lucky to have MJ, you know, leading the way. He has a great background. Amanda, who has put this extraordinary program together, knows that I am like a broken record. She has been pathetically patient with me as we come up with an agenda for all these lobby days, and I go, but what about the elders? And she rolls her eyes. And I'm really grateful for her figuring out that we were able to at least have this conversation this afternoon so that we all get to talk about the needs of elders, whether it's food insecurity, whether it's housing. You know, the irony that the generation that gave us Stonewall are now in their 70s and 80s. And so we think of them as when they were Shear's age. Well, now they're in their 70s and 80s. And the needs they have, and of course it's New York, it's America, and people of color have fewer resources than anyone else. And so it's really, really important that when you say LGBTQ in Albany or City Hall, they don't think of a white gay couple with a country home and all that. What they do is they go to Sage Harlem, they go to Sage Bronx, they go to Sage Staten Island, and see 100 older LGBT people of color that are struggling, that are excited about the chance to come to Sage at Edie Windsor and have a lunch and to be with friends and not be alone and isolated. I think that the more education, the more advocates we have reminding people that there is an LGBT community over the age of 65, I think people will be touched. You know, once we were all Shear's age, and all those people that are 23, if they're lucky, they will get to be Lou Shira's age.
Thank you, Melissa.
I do want to say one thing. I hope that the people, the younger people today are more enlightened than I was, because I've learned a lot lately that I lived obviously during the Stonewall age, but if things don't impact you, you don't pay attention. So I didn't pay attention to civil rights. I didn't pay attention to the Stonewall riot. Stonewall, I hate that word, right? What was the other word? Uprising, whatever, anything other than riot, because that implies something that I don't like. Words are important, and I'm very conscious of that. So I would like the younger people to be more enlightened, and with all the things that are going on right now, it's very hard to make sure that these younger people have the information that's out there to protect them, because looking at what's going on, they may not live to get to my age because the laws they're trying to swing backwards again. So I think that looking at, as an LGBTQ senior, my job is to make sure that my younger brothers, sisters, cousins, children that I keep adopting, because every time I see younger LGBTQ people, they always seem to end up being my children, that they understand how much history is important.
Thank you.
Can I
Sure,
speak
yeah.
to that for just a
Sure.
quick moment, because I think both Melissa and Lajara said what they both said was spot on and on point. What I want to say is that I think we all know the statistic. We all know that the majority of trans people, unfortunately, succumb to anti-trans violence and often are murdered before they are 35. And there are so many older trans elders that I am fortunate to know. And I see that someone in the chat said that we have to do a better job of making sure that there are spaces, that there are more spaces like this for elders and young people. And Lajara, something you said really brought up for me that suicide rates across this country are skyrocketing because of the anti-LGBTQ movements, the anti-trans legislation, the anti-trans sports bans. And so we really have to do a better job of inspiring and empowering young people to stay alive, to live another day so that we can grow old. We have to believe that another world is possible, that this pain won't always be our reality. And I think for me, at least, you know, as someone who has been open and transparent for years about my struggle with suicidal ideation, that is something that I hold on to, is knowing that I do believe another world, another life, another possibility than this current moment is possible for us to experience and enjoy together. And I just think we have to do a much better job of uplifting each other so that we can see that, you know, there is life to be lived. And Lajara and Melissa are both, you know, on this panel representative of that for me.
Thank you so much for all our panelists. We are running close to the end of time, so I just wanted to close out by maybe going around and briefly, we've gotten some comments in the chat about, you know, how do we foster these relationships? Like, how can we create more spaces like this? So we want to quickly go around, and Don, because you do this work, you can hop in on this as well. What advice would you give to fellow community members and organizers about how to break down these barriers that can exist between making intergenerational connections?
Well, if I can go. Thank you, MJ. I think I was trying to facilitate and multitask, but I believe it's Christina had a really wonderful statement about how we have to do these things intentionally. And it's really true. When we did the Ageism Across the Generations out at Staten Island, and we brought together LGBT elders and young people of color, white folks, we actually had to script everything, and they enjoyed 2 hours together. But what we've learned is that oftentimes when intergenerational things are done, maybe for the first 15 minutes or half hour, people, you know, socialize, and then the next hour and a half, they're in their own in their own little caucuses. So I think we have to, I think this speaks to the real challenge that ageism presents us, which it does not, we don't have a culture that at all respects intergenerational dialogue. And I think that we not only have to have that dialogue, but we have to have action steps that come out of it that maintain the intentionality of partnering, you know, elders with young people. It just has to, and we have to do, that's work. I mean, that's organizing work. You know, you never change the society by letting it go on its own. So I just wanted to share that and hope that we can begin to talk about very specific action steps that are intentional, that challenge what we call adultism and ageism. It goes on both directions. So, and I'll pass it to whoever wants to go next. Melissa. Oh, Lajara.
I was just thinking when you were talking about intention, what I used to like, and unfortunately we haven't had one in years, was the sage tables, where you had the intergenerational thing. And the way it worked out was that you never seemed to have the issue of people separating, because so you had a few elders and a few young people, and they switched tables, but it always seemed to be a balance. And it was talking about basically the things they liked, what they enjoyed doing, their interests, find some commonality to actually bring people together. As a writer, I'm looking for artists, just any artist, because I think I just was on a panel today and they were talking about recreation. And I said, why don't we just make it recreation? Because that's more important, recreating our lives. We do that every day. Let's make that intentional.
Thank you. That's great.
So, you know, there's a task at hand for all LGBTQ and queer New Yorkers. I think it's important for older people that have done so much over 15, 20, 25, 30 years to embrace the idea that there's a new generation. They speak differently, they'll think differently. They have access to tools and resources that were unimaginable when we were in our 20s. And so in spite of that idea that they should shut up and listen to us, it's actually the other way around. It's really important that elders recognize the skill and vision of new leaders, and you know, and to just it's really important to learn what we have in common rather than what makes us different. It's easy to see the obvious differences, but it doesn't take long, especially those of us that have a passion for advocacy for community, to see what brings us together, what makes us more alike. All of us on this panel and in the audience, all of us are experts at building coalition. And it's not just people that look and think like us. If we're going to build a coalition, it's got to include as many people as we can. And it's really important that in time, you're gonna take those sharp edges and you're gonna round it off a bit and make it a powerful coalition with passion, with vision and experience all together. Everyone brings something to the table that can be useful. We're all family. It's dealing with the outside that really the work has to be done. Coming together in commonality with all of us, just like we're doing today in Lobby Day. And with all the tools and all the experiences, we're going to leave Albany, go out, and we're going to be a more effective LGBTQ community because of the experiences, in spite of the fact that we're different, and not to let our differences frighten us, but focus more on similarities.
Well said, Melissa. Unfortunately, we are over, so we do have to end. I'm so sorry to share. We do have to end because we have one more thing, but thank you all for joining us. Great, thank you so much. Woo!
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.